Teetotal was another word that came into the language from the Irish settlers, along with speakeasy, shillelagh and smithereens, yes indeedy and no siree, and later of course came on the wagon. Westward expansion had long been the cause of land disputes between the settlers and the natives, and once they left the great rivers for the wagon routes like the Oregon and the Santa Fe trails, contact and often friction between migrants and Indians increased. Many of the Indian words that had already come into English reflected this antagonism. Scalp, a good old English noun, had become a far more threatening verb as early as 1693. Tomahawk was another early addition to the language. So were warpath, war whoop, war dance, and long knives, an Indian word for white man, and firewater, the term they gave to alcohol. Phrases like no can do or long time no see are literal translations from Indian languages. The word brave to describe Indian warriors was certainly inherited from the French, and buck, slang for $1, derives from buckskin, the standard unit of trade between Europeans and Indians. Conflict with the natives was just one of the hazards faced by the people who went west. Every one of them had an epic journey to tell of the hardships imposed by distance and the weather. Every one had carved a new life out of a landscape made on a scale unknown in Europe. They chose new American heroes for themselves, through whose stories they could distill their own experiences, and they chose them and told tales about them on a grand scale. The most famous of all straddled the gap between fact and fiction, Davy Crockett. He was, as we know from the song, born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. He was the son of a veteran of the Revolution. He became a congressman, famous for his plain speaking, and he died defending the Alamo in Texas in 1836. He was as American as they came, and he became a legend, the king of the wild frontier, the hero of a series of paper-bound books telling exaggerated stories about him. This fictionalized Crockett was the first great exponent of a style of speech as big as the country, called tall talk. When he opened his mouth, he made the forest shake.
These is times to come upon us like a whirlwind and an earthquake. They are come like a catamount at full jump. We are called upon to show our grit like a ball lightning against a pine log, to exterminate, mollify, and calumniate the foe. Pierce the heart of the enemy, cram his pesky carcass full of thunder and lightning like a stuffed sausage, and turtle him off with a red-hot poker. And while the stars of Uncle Sam and the stripes of his country wave triumphantly in the breeze, where is the craven, low-lived, chicken-bred, toad-hopping, red-mounted, bristle-headed mother son of ye who will not raise the beacon light of triumph, snouse the citadel of the aggressor, and squeeze ahead to liberty and glory?
Confidence bred ornate Baroque words, shebang, shindig, and slumgullion, kaflop, kabang, and kathump. An American need not simply leave hurriedly, he could absquatulate or skedaddle. He didn't just use something up, he exflunkitated it. The language was hunky-dory, rambunctious, splendiferous. Its vigor was in speech, and that habit of coming up with vivid verbal images has left us with many that figure in everyday talk. It's not my funeral if you fly off the handle because you have a chip on your shoulder and an axe to grind. I won't sit on the fence and dodge the issue. I won't fizzle out. I won't crack up. No two ways about it. I'll knuckle down and make the fur fly. I'll go the whole hog and knock the spots out of you, and you'll be a goner. You'll kick the bucket. So face the music. You're barking up the wrong tree. You won't get the drop on me. I'm in cahoots with some people with the know-how. Keep a stiff upper lip and have the horse sense to pull up stakes, okay? Within 2 generations of the opening of Louisiana, the American language had been reborn. No legislator sitting in a library in one of the eastern states could have hoped to arrest its exuberant progress. It's a fact that the biggest author of the language is Anon. This was the democratic language that Adams had foreseen, but democracy meant that everyone threw in their 2 cents worth, and the old conservative values were trampled in the movement west. And never quicker than when gold was discovered in them thar hills. Gold fever brought tens of thousands of people from the eastern states, and their letters home were loaded with new words. Prospector was one. They wrote about how they'd staked their claim, about how they hoped that gold dust would pan out of the water that they were sieving, or they would strike it lucky or strike it rich and produce a bonanza, which came from the Spanish word for fair weather. And for the first time, a surefire investment became known colloquially as a gold mine. And the gold rush gave us two words that became far more famous in the 20th century. When a certain Levi Strauss started to make hard-wearing clothes for miners, he used a cloth called jean fustian, originally made in Genoa. Levi's and jeans have been as American as Stars and Stripes ever since. But other envious souls used to try to pass themselves off as the man who had such a simple but brilliant idea. And so he developed the habit of introducing himself to strangers as the real McCoy. He gave the world a catchphrase, and he also gave it the cowboy. English had known the word cowboy since the 18th century, but now it took on a new currency and a new meaning. McCoy's brainwave turned the cattle industry into a license to print money and the cowboy into a national icon. Cowboys had been working near the Mexican border for years, picking up Spanish words, which now drove north with them. Ranch comes from the Spanish, as does corral, where horses or cattle were penned. Mustang, bronco, and the more humble burro, the chaps, sombrero and poncho they might wear, the cinch that secured the saddle, the lariat and the lasso they used to rope cattle, the sierras, mesas and canyons they rode across, the cries of vamoose and pronto, the stampede that they feared, and the rodeo where they drove the cattle together, all came from Spanish. The language of the West has become the standard idea of what American English is like, completely overtaking the proper speech of the East. And the man who is virtually single-handedly responsible for this was one of the greatest showmen and boosters of them all. He was William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill, and he chose to be buried here, on the hills above Denver, where the Rockies rise steeply out of the Great Plains. He turned the frontier experience into an epic entertainment, Buffalo Bill's Wild West. The extravaganza featured live elk and buffalo, real Indians attacking a stagecraft of Custer's Last Stand at Little Bighorn, in which Buffalo Bill himself arrived on the scene just too late to save the day. It was nonsense, and it was a smash across America and Europe for 30 years, long after Indian resistance had ended and the last buffalo herd had been massacred. It created a vogue for the language of the West and began a line of Western myth that kept that language alive through countless books and films. And the dreams of luxury and optimism became an enduring fantasy of a Western El Dorado, an Eden, somewhere over the rainbow, or at least the next county line. It's all there in a little song about the hobos, another good frontier word, who rode the railways west in search of their own American dream.
In the big rock candy mountains, you never change your socks, and the little streams of alcohol come a-trickling down the rocks. The brakemen have to tip their hats and the railroad bulls are blind. There's a lake of stew and a whiskey too. You can paddle all around them in a big canoe in the big rock candy mountains.
But there was another group of Americans who'd never been invited to share that dream, the black slave population of the South. And they spoke about their experiences in a very different language.
I'll see you all this coming fall in the big rock candy mountains.
This is Sullivan's Island, a little patch of land in Charleston Harbor off the coast of South Carolina. It was the first taste of America for hundreds of thousands of immigrants in the 18th and 19th centuries. But the immigrants who came through here hadn't chosen the American dream of a better life. They had been sold into slavery. Sullivan's Island was a holding pen for imported slaves. Between half and two-thirds of them entered America here, before being sold on mainly to work on the cotton plantations. There's no Statue of Liberty here, just this plaque, erected in 1999 to commemorate their arrival. They came here from the countries of West Africa and from plantations in the Caribbean. Slaves who spoke different languages were put together on the same sea voyage here to stop them plotting together to seize control of the ship. So on ship and on shore, there was a great babel of languages. The slaves had to find a tongue in which to talk to one another and to their masters. It was English, but English very heavily influenced by African ways of talking.
Then you all get home and put his board and get the oyster up in the fat. Yes, next thing you know, the man to knock on the door. Yes, sir. So you just been out in the creek just now? Yes, sir. Just come up the creek, sir.
Yeah. I tell them, say you take the gullah or the Jaffa and anything, you have a spot of tea.
The language these people are talking is Gullah, which has survived as a distinct variety of English here around the South Carolina islands.
This fella come here and walk up on the bank and say, what you doing up on that bank there? And he said, don't you notice
It's
my
thought
bank?
by many people to be the closest we can get to the kind of language that would have been spoken by the slaves in the 18th and early 19th centuries, and that this is the origin of modern Afro-American vernacular.
After John get off about 50 feet off, and John look over there, and he go on his boat, and he look, his boat done sank down. He start hollering, hey, help, help. John said, I ain't rough yet.
We put together varying African words along with Elizabethan English and came out with something that sounded like a this year when Hana de Yeti we talk like a this. So sometimes people think maybe it's English, then they go, but not quite. There were Igbos, Mandinkas, Malinkes, Yorubas, Golas, Gidzi, Afik, Mende that were all kidnapped, captured, and then isolated together on these islands during enslavement.